Sarah Bennett walked into courtroom 302 of the Manhattan Federal Court building with measured steps, her designer heels clicking against the polished marble floor, while her perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit masked the anxiety churning in her stomach. The leather briefcase in her right hand contained not only the documents for today's hearing, but also the draft of her upcoming novel hidden beneath tax records and bank statements. She had spent the morning in her penthouse office overlooking Central Park making final edits to Chapter 12. Before her attorney called to remind her of the court appearance. The irony wasn't lost on her that while millions of readers were devouring her latest romance bestseller about a wronged heiress seeking justice, she herself was about to face a judge over accusations that felt equally fictional. Her cleaning business, Sweet Sparkle Services, had been her side project, a way to understand the lives of working-class women who often became the heroines in her books. But now that very business, which generated barely 10% of her annual income, had drawn the attention of a zealous prosecutor and a judge known for his harsh sentencing of minority defendants. Her literary agent Marcus had advised against coming to court today, suggesting she send her attorney instead. But Sarah believed in facing challenges head-on the same way her characters did in her novels, which had earned her spot on the New York Times bestseller list for 42 consecutive weeks. The security guard at the metal detector had barely glanced at her ID, checking only her name, Sarah Bennett, while remaining oblivious to the fact that she was also Catherine Clare, the author whose latest book sat prominently displayed in the courthouse gift shop window. She had passed on her way in the morning sunlight streaming through the tall courthouse windows, cast dramatic shadows across the room as Sarah made her way to the defendant's table, her mind already crafting potential scenes for her next novel, drawing from the nervous energy permeating the air around her fellow defendants. Waiting in the gallery, the worn wooden benches filled with people whose stories she would normally be eager to hear and transform into compelling narratives, sat behind her like a silent jury of their own. The clock on the wall ticked steadily toward 9:30 am, while her publisher in London waited for her call about the international release dates that would now have to wait. She placed her briefcase on the dark wooden table before her, carefully extracting the relevant documents while leaving her manuscript hidden away like a secret identity. The courtroom clerk bustled about preparing for the day's proceedings, completely unaware that the woman he had just handed forms to had sold more books last month than any other author in the country. Sarah straightened her spine and adjusted her glasses the same way her most popular character, Detective Maria Jones, would before confronting a suspect, the familiar action bringing a small smile to her face. Despite the circumstances, her attorney Lisa Rodriguez slipped into the seat beside her, whispering last-minute reassurances while organizing their defense strategy. But Sarah's attention drifted momentarily to the young law clerk, furiously highlighting passages in a book that she recognized as her own. The universe, it seemed, had a peculiar sense of humor today. Judge William Harrison barely glanced up as the African-American woman took her seat at the defendant's table, his wire-rimmed glasses perched low on his nose, while his fingers drummed an impatient rhythm against his mahogany bench. The morning light caught the silver of his perfectly coiffed hair, highlighting decades of privilege and power that seemed to emanate from his very presence in the federal courthouse, where he had presided for over 20 years. His reputation for being tough on what he called minor offenders was well known throughout the legal community, though few dared to challenge his sometimes questionable rulings. His eyes narrowed slightly as he reviewed the case file before him, the corners of his mouth turning downward in what had become his signature expression of disapproval. The name Sarah Bennett meant nothing to him, just another defendant in an endless parade of cases that crossed his bench each day. The charge of tax evasion from a small cleaning business seemed beneath his usual caseload, but he had specifically requested cases involving minority-owned businesses, claiming a special interest in ensuring their compliance with federal regulations. His voice carried that particular tone of condescension that he had perfected over years of addressing those he deemed beneath his station, the words "little lady" rolling off his tongue with practiced ease as he addressed the defendant, his hand gesture dismissive. When Sarah attempted to speak in her own defense, the gallery of observers shifted uncomfortably in their seats as the judge continued his opening remarks, peppered with thinly veiled assumptions about her education level and business acumen. The morning sun cast his shadow long across the courtroom floor like a physical manifestation of his looming authority. The American flag behind his bench seemed to mock the very principles of justice it represented. As he shuffled through the papers before him with exaggerated sighs of disapproval, his clerk beside him dutifully took notes, though her discomfort with his tone was evident in her rigid posture. The prosecuting attorney stood with an air of confidence that came from knowing the judge typically sided with their arguments in cases like these, while the defense table remained remained tensely silent, their strategy requiring patience as the judge revealed his biases through his own words. The temperature in the courtroom seemed to drop several degrees as Judge Harrison launched into one of his infamous lectures about personal responsibility and the importance of understanding basic business law, his voice dripping with presumptions about the defendant's capabilities. The morning calendar displayed on the wall behind him showed a full docket, but he appeared determined to take his time with this particular case, savoring what he assumed would be another easy conviction to add to his record. The leather of his chair creaked as he leaned forward to peer down at Sarah over his glasses, his expression one of practiced superiority that had intimidated countless defendants before her. The sunlight streaming through the high windows cast harsh shadows across his face, deepening the lines of prejudice etched there by years of unchecked power and privilege. The prosecuting attorney stood at his podium shuffling through papers with an air of smug confidence as he presented what appeared to be damning evidence from Sweet Sparkle Services bank statements. The documents projected onto the courtroom screen showed modest deposits and withdrawals typical of a small cleaning business, while the prosecutor emphasized what he called suspicious patterns in the cash flow. His voice carried the practiced cadence of someone certain of victory as he detailed Sarah's alleged financial mismanagement, completely unaware of the separate accounts held at 3 different banks under her pen name Catherine Clare, which contained millions in properly reported publishing royalties from her international book deals. The morning light caught the edges of the bank statements, making them seem almost translucent as the prosecutor held them up for dramatic effect. His entire case built on the assumption that Sarah's cleaning business represented her sole source of income, while her literary agent Thomas Maxwell sat quietly in the third row of the gallery holding a briefcase filled with documentation of her best-selling novels and speaking engagements. The projector hummed softly as slide after slide of financial records appeared on screen, each one telling only half the story. As Sarah's real accountant, Margaret Chen watched from her seat near the back of the courtroom, knowing that her testimony would soon reveal the complete picture of her client's extensive financial portfolio. The prosecutor paced before the jury, his expensive shoes clicking against the floor as he painted a picture of financial impropriety that grew more absurd with each passing moment. To those who knew Sarah's true identity, his entire argument rested on the premise that someone running a modest cleaning service must be hiding something, when in reality, the only thing hidden was her remarkably successful writing career. The sunlight streaming through the high windows illuminated the dust motes in the air as he gestured emphatically toward charts showing business expenses and payroll records that had been meticulously maintained by both Sarah's business manager and her publishing team. The morning wore on as the prosecution built its case on incomplete information, while Sarah sat calmly at the defense table, occasionally making notes in a leather-bound notebook that contained not only her thoughts on the proceedings but also ideas for her next novel. The gallery had filled as the morning progressed with several aspiring writers who regularly attended her workshops, unknowingly supporting their mentor as she faced accusations that would soon crumble under the weight of full disclosure. The prosecuting attorney appeared increasingly confident as he approached his closing argument, completely oblivious to the fact that his entire case was about to be dismantled by evidence of Sarah's legitimate and substantial income from her literary endeavors. As Judge Harrison made condescending remarks about Sarah's supposed inability to manage a simple cleaning service, the morning sunlight caught the polished MBA diploma in Margaret Chen's briefcase. The certified accountant sat patiently in the gallery, her perfectly organized files containing 5 years of immaculate financial records from both Sarah's cleaning business and her publishing empire. The murmur of the courtroom provided background noise as Judge Harrison continued his lecture about basic business principles while completely dismissing the evidence of Sarah's business degree from Howard University, where she had graduated summa cum laude before launching her first successful enterprise. Margaret watched the proceedings with growing disbelief, her hands folded neatly over the portfolio containing proof of Sarah's multi-million-dollar book deals and speaking engagements. The morning air grew thick with tension as the judge repeatedly interrupted Sarah's attorney, dismissing attempts to present evidence of her client's extensive business acumen. The sunbeams streaming through the tall windows seemed to highlight the absurdity of the situation as Sarah's accountant observed the judge's increasingly biased behavior while waiting for her moment to testify about the complex financial portfolio she had managed for the past decade. The leather chair creaked beneath Margaret as she shifted position, reviewing her mental inventory of perfectly maintained ledgers, quarterly reports, and tax filings that would soon expose the hollow nature of the prosecution's case. The gallery had grown more crowded as the morning wore on, with several of Sarah's business associates quietly entering to witness the proceedings, their presence adding to the mounting pressure in the courtroom as Judge Harrison continued his patronizing commentary about small business management. The morning calendar on the wall showed 3 more hours until Margaret's scheduled testimony time that seemed to stretch endlessly as she watched her client maintain perfect composure. Despite the judge's increasingly inappropriate remarks, the air conditioning hummed softly in the background as Margaret observed the defense attorney preparing to present evidence of Sarah's academic achievements and business success. While the judge appeared determined to ignore any information that contradicted his preconceived notions about the defendant, Sarah's actual financial records sat organized in color-coded files within Margaret's briefcase, each page telling the story of a shrewd businesswoman who had built multiple successful enterprises while maintaining exemplary accounting practices. The morning light created patterns on the courtroom floor as Margaret noticed several jury members beginning to show signs of discomfort with the judge's obvious bias, their expressions changing as they observed the growing stack of evidence that contradicted his assumptions. The breaking point arrived with thunderous intensity as Judge Harrison suggested Sarah take a basic financial literacy course, his voice dripping with condescension, while he casually dismissed the framed business degree from Howard University that her attorney held before him. The morning session had stretched into its 3rd hour, and the gallery watched in stunned silence as the judge continued his tirade about proper business management and the importance of education, his words becoming more patronizing with each passing moment. Sarah's hands remained steady as she wrote in her notebook beneath the table, capturing every degrading comment and microaggression that would later fuel her next best-selling novel. While her attorney attempted repeatedly to present evidence of her academic achievements, the sunlight streaming through the courthouse windows cast harsh shadows across Judge Harrison's face as he waved away documentation of Sarah's perfect academic record and numerous business awards, his dismissive gesture speaking volumes about his predetermined views. The temperature in the courtroom seemed to rise with each passing minute as the judge lectured about the importance of seeking proper education and mentorship, his words falling like hammer blows in the tense atmosphere. While completely ignoring the stack of accolades before him, several jurors shifted uncomfortably in their seats as Judge Harrison compared Sarah's business practices to those of a child running a lemonade stand, his analogy drawing quiet gasps from the gallery where several successful business owners sat in support of their colleague. The morning had revealed layer upon layer of judicial misconduct as the judge repeatedly interrupted presentations of Sarah's qualifications, preferring instead to offer unsolicited advice about community college courses and small business workshops. Sarah's attorney stood her ground, firmly requesting the evidence be entered into record, while the judge continued his diatribe about responsibility and education, his voice rising in irritation at her persistence. The leather chairs in the jury box creaked with tension as 12 citizens watched the scene unfold, their expressions ranging from disbelief to outright anger, as Judge Harrison suggested Sarah might benefit from remedial math classes despite the evidence of her master's-level statistics courses. The morning light illuminated the growing stack of dismissed qualifications on the defense table, each certificate, award, and diploma telling the story of a woman whose academic and business achievements far surpassed those of the man currently judging her. The air in the courtroom grew increasingly thick with unspoken outrage as Judge Harrison continued his patronizing speech about basic business principles. While Sarah's portfolio of successful enterprises sat unopened before him, her attorney's objections falling on deaf ears, as the judge seemed determined to paint his own picture of the defendant regardless of the evidence presented. Sarah's attorney finally called her literary agent to the stand, while the morning light streamed through the courtroom windows, illuminating Thomas Maxwell's confident stride to the witness box, his Armani suit and leather briefcase marking him as someone familiar with success. The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted perceptibly as he was sworn in, while Judge Harrison continued his patronizing demeanor. Completely unaware of the revelation about to unfold, the questioning began with simple establishment of credentials. Thomas Maxwell stating his 20 years of experience in the publishing industry and his role at one of New York's most prestigious literary agencies. The morning air grew thick with anticipation as Sarah's attorney skillfully led the questioning toward the pivotal moment. Maxwell's voice carried clearly through the courtroom as he revealed Enns Bennett's true identity as Catherine Clare, the best-selling author of international romantic suspense novels. Judge Harrison's face transformed through a series of expressions as the color drained rapidly from his features, recognition, shock, and embarrassment fighting for dominance as he recalled not only praising her latest book, the judge's silence at last week's Literary Society dinner, but specifically commenting on its powerful portrayal of systemic bias. The gallery erupted in hushed whispers as Thomas Maxwell produced contracts and royalty statements showing advances in earnings that dwarfed the annual salary of everyone present in the courtroom, including Judge Harrison himself. The Morning Sun caught the golden embossed lettering on the covers of Sarah's novels as her agent arranged them on the witness stand, each one a New York Times bestseller with translations in 42 languages. The leather chair behind the bench creaked as Judge Harrison attempted to maintain his composure, while Maxwell detailed Sarah's upcoming book tour and the bidding war currently underway for her next 3-book contract. The air in the courtroom crackled with tension as the literary agent described Sarah's habit of running legitimate small businesses to research her characters, explaining how Sweet Sparkle Services had provided inspiration for her latest protagonist, a cleaning service owner who solves crimes. The morning calendar on the wall seemed to mock the proceedings as Maxwell revealed that Sarah's next novel, scheduled for release in 3 months, featured a prejudiced judge whose bias leads to his own downfall. Judge Harrison's hands trembled slightly as he shuffled papers on his bench, trying to avoid eye contact with the jury members, who now stared at him with obvious disapproval. The sunlight created shadows that seemed to dance across the courtroom floor as Thomas Maxwell concluded his testimony by presenting Sarah's latest royalty statement, showing earnings that exceeded Judge Harrison's entire judicial salary by several multiples. The courtroom erupted in a wave of whispers and gasps as Thomas Maxwell continued his testimony, the morning sunlight catching the golden edges of publisher contracts spread across the witness stand while he detailed Sarah Bennett's multimillion-dollar publishing empire. The gallery, now packed with spectators, leaned forward collectively as the literary agent revealed how Sarah's novels had sold over 15 million copies worldwide, with her latest release spending 20 consecutive weeks at #1. His voice carried clearly through the hushed space as he explained how Sweet Sparkle Services had begun as research for her breakthrough novel Clean Sweet, the story of a cleaning service owner who uncovers a money laundering operation. The morning air grew thick with tension as Maxwell described Sarah's meticulous approach to character research, including her habit of personally running small businesses to authentically capture the experiences of working-class women. The leather-bound portfolio in his hands revealed contracts for film adaptations, speaking engagements, and merchandise deals that generated annual revenues exceeding $50 million. The sunlight streaming through the courthouse windows illuminated the faces of jury members as they processed the revelation that the woman Judge Harrison had been lecturing about financial literacy earned more in monthly royalties than he made in a year. Thomas Maxwell's testimony continued with detailed explanations of how Sarah maintained separate business entities for her literary work and research enterprises, each one properly managed and documented by top accounting firms. The gallery now included several recognized faces from the publishing world who had slipped in to witness the unfolding drama as Maxwell described how Sarah's upcoming novel ironically featured a prejudiced judge whose assumption. Judge Harrison attempted to call the recess, his voice wavering with barely contained panic as the Chief Judge Margaret Sullivan entered the courtroom, her presence commanding immediate attention as she strode purposefully down the center aisle, having been alerted to potential judicial misconduct and bias in the proceedings. The morning light cast stark shadows across Judge Harrison's face as Chief Judge Sullivan took her position at the front of the courtroom, her expression grave. While reviewing the transcript of the day's proceedings that had been urgently forwarded to her office by concerned court staff, the gallery watched in tense silence as she methodically reviewed evidence of Judge Harrison's prejudicial comments and dismissive behavior, while Sarah Bennett remained perfectly composed at the defense table, still taking notes for what would undoubtedly become compelling material for her next bestseller. The leather-bound judicial folder in Chief Judge Sullivan's hands contained not only the morning's transcript, but also a collection of similar complaints against Judge Harrison spanning the past 5 years, previously overlooked, but now demanding immediate attention. The sunlight streaming through the tall windows seemed to spotlight Judge Harrison as he attempted to explain his conduct, his words ringing hollow in the face of overwhelming evidence, while Chief Judge Sullivan's expression grew increasingly stern with each passing moment. The air in the courtroom grew thick with anticipation as she reviewed the documentation of Sarah's actual qualifications and achievements, which Judge Harrison had so casually dismissed, her eyes narrowing at particularly egregious examples of his bias. The morning calendar forgotten Judge Sullivan addressed the court, her voice carrying the weight of authority as she detailed the immediate suspension of proceedings pending a full investigation into judicial conduct, while several members of the Judicial Review Board filed into the gallery, having been summoned to witness the proceedings firsthand. The temperature in the courtroom seemed to drop several degrees as Chief Judge Sullivan systematically addressed each instance of prejudicial behavior, exhibited during the morning session her precise legal terminology, leaving no doubt about the serious nature of the situation. The leather chairs creaked in protest as members of the gallery shifted to better observe Judge Harrison's mounting discomfort, while Chief Judge Sullivan announced the immediate transfer of all his current cases to other judges pending a complete review of his conduct and decision-making patterns. The case was dismissed with prejudice as Chief Judge Sullivan signed the final order while the morning sunlight illuminated the now crowded courtroom. Sarah's immediate countersuit for discrimination and judicial misconduct had already been prepared by her legal team, who had documented every biased comment and prejudicial ruling throughout the proceedings. The gallery watched as Judge Harrison was escorted from the bench, his career effectively ended by his own prejudice, while Sarah's publishing team began drafting press releases about her upcoming novel Blind Justice. Inspired by the morning's events, the leather briefcase that had contained her manuscript now held signed settlement papers as Sarah's attorneys negotiated a substantial compensation package for damages to her reputation and business interests. The morning air hummed with activity as news reporters gathered outside the courthouse, eager to cover the story of how a best-selling author exposed systemic bias in the federal court system, while Judge Harrison found himself assigned to mandatory bias training and sensitivity courses that would last 6 months. The sunlight caught the edges of Sarah's newest book contract as she signed the deal for Blind Justice, which her publisher had already predicted would become her biggest bestseller. Yet based on early interest from international markets, the temperature in the courtroom slowly returned to normal as Sarah packed away her notes and evidence, while her literary agent fielded calls from major news networks eager to interview the author who had turned a case of judicial prejudice into a platform for exposing systemic bias. The morning calendar lay forgotten on the judge's bench as Sarah's team discussed plans for a nationwide speaking tour addressing bias in the justice system. While pre-orders for Blind Justice reached record numbers, Sarah's cleaning business employees watched from the gallery as their boss transformed a moment of injustice into an opportunity for change, their pride evident as she announced plans to establish a foundation supporting minority-owned businesses. With legal assistance, the air crackled with possibility as Sarah stepped out of the courthouse, her next chapter already beginning, while Judge Harrison's career faded into a cautionary tale about the consequences of unchecked prejudice.